The third demonstration is going to be for invoices, to where vendor information, header, footer, and line item will all automatically be extracted. There's different business rules that are going to be applied, such as the amount calculations. There's going to be automated separation and classification. A fourth demonstration is going to be a continuance of the invoice demonstration using some invoices where automation fails. It fails, and the invoices are designed so that it will fail, so that I can show you from my actions the software learning with no coding and no reconfiguration. It just learns from my actions. Again, I think it is one of the greatest features to empower you as a processor for any cognitive document automation strategy.
Next, I'm going to import some invoices. And we're going to see some invoice automation processing, which is always exciting, especially for accounting departments that struggle to get invoices processed timely. You'll notice that the invoices are standard invoice formats, which means they're all different. All different layouts. So the idea of invoice templates or templating would never be successful, especially in large invoice environments. You have no control over it. If you were templating, the templates would change without notice often, so there would be limited success doing it that way. TotalAgility looks at the entire page, looks at the context to find what's important, whether it's header fields, footer fields, or line items, as you'll see. There's no cover sheets, no separator sheets, so it doesn't matter if these are scanned in, if they're emailed, if they're submitted from a vendor portal. So let's create this job. Now we'll open the job in Document Review. One thing I did not mention is that one of the invoices is a 2-page invoice. And KTA was able to find that. And if you're wondering, how does it know to separate invoices into its respective pages? It's actually very simple. It's the same way that we would process invoices if we had a stack of invoices on our desk today. Is it the same vendor? And does the subsequent pages have the same invoice number, or in many cases, no invoice number? And if so, then we know that there's subsequent pages. It can also use page numbers to know if pages are missing and to know if those pages are related to the previous page for the same invoice. It separated everything correctly. So we are going to complete this step. Now we'll open the job validation. Notice that it takes me to the first problem document, not the first document in the job. And a job could be one invoice or it could be many invoices. Just a matter of how you want to distribute that work. So I'm going to go back to this first invoice so we can look at it even though everything is correct. I'm going to zoom in just a little bit so that you can see. So the vendor ID, obviously the vendor doesn't put their vendor ID. However, it was able to determine that this is A1 lighting from all the different pieces of vendor information that's on the invoice. The invoice number it found right here. Invoice date. It did not find a PO number, and there is not one on this invoice. It was able to find, oops, let me zoom back in so you can see. So it found a total, and one of our rules is when you cannot find a subtotal, it will infer the subtotal from the total, which is a very common practice. So discounts, found 0 discount. Taxes, it did not find taxes, and there is no amount for the taxes, and there is no amount for shipping or freight. So this is correct. Let's look at the line items. This can be very exciting for accounting folks who have to process down to the line item, and they have large invoices and are having to painstakingly look at every invoice and data enter it. So this has done the work for us automatically. It found the table. It was able to find the information, the amounts, description, quantity, unit price. If there's other fields that are important to your accounting environment, there's no limitation to these fields. Let's look at the next document. This document has a different set of fields that it finds on the invoice document. The vendor is the Bertram Supply Company, and that is correct. It found the invoice number, even with poor quality on the invoice. Found the invoice date right here. It did find a PO number. However, again, we're not doing PO matching, so it's not really checking the PO number against a PO environment. We can do a search for a PO if we needed to, but it's not doing any line item matching in this demonstration. We found an amount. No discount found. Sales tax found. Freight found. And total found. So that is correct. So let's look at the next invoice. This invoice is from CDW. Yet a totally different layout. You can see that it found the fields, different places. It's inferring the subtotal from the total because it did not find specifically a subtotal mentioned on the invoice. And it is correct. The next document. From Kralin. Invoice number, and you can see that this is like an inverted layout. So that's yet something different. I'm going to zoom in so you can see this information what it found. The invoice date. PO number. Subtotal. It did not. It's inferring the subtotal. Even though there is one there, but it is actually correct from the total. Let's look at the first document that it knows it has an issue with. So this invoice is one in particular that we're going to, after we show invoices in the context invoices, I'm going to show the learning capability. And this invoice in particular has all the labels essentially damaged. It's purposely got shading that was not cleaned up using VRS, so that shading destroys the context. So it finds certain things inferring formats, but it doesn't know because it doesn't know the context because it can't see any of this. So I found the invoice number just fine, the invoice date. I want to show you something as to how you can correct some of this. Let's say this wasn't the right date. Maybe it needed this date rather than the first date it found on the document. I can just rubber band and it changes that field. I hit enter and it formats it. We can go back and correct that back to the right one just simply by rubber banding, hitting enter to apply the format. So right now it's telling us that we have a calculation issue. Our subtotal added any discount that it couldn't find, to tax it couldn't find, and freight it couldn't find because it can't find the context. Doesn't match a total that it was able to find. So this is correct. I mean, hit enter. It still doesn't work because the calculation doesn't match. So what are we missing? We're missing freight. I rubber band, I hit enter, Shazam, the calculation works, and everything's fine. This is a different invoice from the same vendor, so the format is the same, and we have the same issues. So I'm going to fix it the same way. Rubber band, hit enter. It's saying everything's fine. It wants to close the job, but I want to look at the other documents just so you can see. Completely different layout for invoice. Finds the invoice number, invoice date. Finds the total amount. It actually found the discount right there. Found shipping. Let's look at the 2-page invoice. Totally different layout. It finds subtotal, discount, tax, and amount. But let's look at the line items, because again, that can be rather exciting for a accounts payable processor. Because this is 2 pages. It could be 25 pages. I can click in the cell and it takes me right to where that information is. What's exciting is if you step through this, on page 1, it just automatically went back to page 1 to show me. So I'm going to zoom in so you can see better. And it takes me right to where that information's found. So we're on page 1. Now I'm going to go to the last record here in the table, the line item, and it's found on page 2. It goes automatically to page 2. So this could be page 25, and it would take the processor right to where that line item is. So if they're trying to figure out where there's a discrepancy in price, it's very easy to do and very quick. So something of line items I will show you if for some reason the automation could not figure out the table because of the format, or if it found the columns in the wrong order. I'm going to show you how we can do that manually. So I've removed all the line items from this invoice. And now I'm going to add it back manually. So the description can be found here, and I'm just rubber banding just like any other field. I'm going into that field. Now I'm going to tell it to go look for all the other line items. Voila. Now, because I did it manually and it didn't do it automatically, it's found a few other pieces of information that are not part of the line items, so I'm just going to remove it. The red cells, it tells me that it's not certain, and that's because these are the ones that I mapped. So I'm hitting enter on them, and it wants to confirm that these are, because it's just not confident that's the value. So I'm hitting enter. So that's how you can actually extract table information manually. Found the invoice number on this invoice, invoice date. It's inferring this might be a PO number. It's not, but we're not in a PO environment, so that's not important in the business rules. Found a subtotal. Found tax. Found shipping. And found a total. Different invoice. Found the invoice number. Invoice date. Found a PO number. Total. Notice that for tax, freight, miscellaneous, there's no amounts here. And the total is correct. So I'm going to complete this job. And it will go to whatever the ERP system is that you have, whether it's Microsoft Dynamics, Oracle EBS, or any number of other ERP environments, and then the documents can go to any system of record repository. So let's look at this online learning that I have mentioned and can be a very exciting concept to where automation can become much more accurate over time. So I'm going to use a couple of our invoice documents that need a little extra help from learning. So I'm going to import them one at a time so they go through in separate jobs. And this is that invoice. You'll remember that it doesn't know all the context because it can't read the labels because of the background noise that exists. They've been damaged, basically. So I'm going to create this job. I'm going to import another one. Create that job. Now I'm going to do the same thing 2 more times. And what's happening is your vendor has sent their invoice the first time, and you're going to see me do rubber banding. I'm going to tell the system, remember, and then they send another invoice maybe the next month or maybe 2 weeks later, and it's going to ask the user to essentially tell them again, so the system's getting that same information multiple times, so it knows it's not just going to act upon one training. It needs a few training, a few times for it to start returning that to the user, because it wants to make sure it's accurate as well. So that's how learning works. So that's where I'm doing, is creating multiple jobs that could have come in over months or weeks, depending upon how often this vendor invoices. I'm going to open the next job in document review. Of course, it's only the single invoice. I'm going to say complete it. Going to open that in validation. We're going to do the same action. Tell it to remember. Let it complete. Open the next job in document review. Move it along. Going to open in validation. And now it's telling me it doesn't have an issue. So I'm going to tell it no so we can look at it. Now it's starting to return the freight. And we can do this on any field that we would need to. So that is online learning. It is that simple. And it was all done by me as a user telling the automation what it needs to be extracting and where. So I do hope this was helpful. This concludes the actual demonstration.
Thank you for watching this video. Please visit us at www.trombatech.com for more information. Or you can email us at sales@trombatech.com with any questions that you may have. We can also begin a discussion for any tailored demonstration that you might require. Thank you again for joining us for this video.